The Lotus in the Bottle by O. Henry. Willard Geddie, consul for the United States in Coralio, was working leisurely on his yearly report. Goodwin, who had strolled in as he did daily for a smoke on the much-coveted porch, had found him so absorbed in his work that he departed after roundly abusing the consul for his lack of hospitality. "I shall complain to the Civil Service Department," said Goodwin. "Or is it a department? Perhaps it's only a theory. One gets neither civility nor service from you. You won't talk, and you won't set out anything to drink. What kind of a way is that of representing your government?" Goodwin strolled out and across to the hotel to see if he could bully the quarantine doctor into a game on Coralio's solitary billiard table. His plans were completed for the interception of the fugitives from the capital, and now it was but a waiting game that he had to play. The consul was interested in his report. He was only 24, and he had not been in Coralio long enough for his enthusiasm to cool in the heat of the tropics, a paradox that may be allowed between Cancer and Capricorn. So many thousand bunches of bananas, so many thousand oranges and coconuts, so many ounces of gold dust, pounds of rubber, coffee, indigo and sarsaparilla. Actually, exports were 20% greater than for the previous year. A little thrill of satisfaction ran through the consul. Perhaps, he thought, the State Department, upon reading his introduction, would notice, and then he leaned back in his chair and laughed. He was getting as bad as the others. For the moment he had forgotten that Coralio was an insignificant republic lying along the byways of a second-rate sea. He thought of Greg, the quarantine doctor, who subscribed for the London Lancet, expecting to find it quoting his reports to the Home Board of Health concerning the yellow fever germ. The consul knew that not 1 in 50 of his acquaintances in the States had ever heard of Coralio. He knew that 2 men, at any rate, would have to read his report, some underling in the State Department and a compositor in the public printing office. Perhaps the typesticker would note the increase of commerce in Coralio and speak of it, over the cheese and beer, to a friend. He had just written, "Most unaccountable is the supineness of the large exporters in the United States in permitting the French and German houses to practically control the trade interests of this rich and productive country." When he heard the hoarse notes of a steamer's siren, Geddie laid down his pen and gathered his Panama hat and umbrella. By the sound he knew it to be the Valhalla, one of the line of fruit vessels plying for the Vesuvius Company. Down to Ninos of 5 years, everyone in Coralio could name you each incoming steamer by the note of her siren. The consul sauntered by a roundabout, shaded way to the beach. By reason of long practice, he gauged his stroll so accurately that by the time he arrived on the sandy shore, the boat of the customs officials was rowing back from the steamer, which had been boarded and inspected according to the laws of Anchuria. There is no harbor at Coralio. Vessels of the draft of the Valhalla must ride at anchor a mile from shore. When they take on fruit, it is conveyed on lighters and freighter sloops. At Solitas, where there was a fine harbor, ships of many kinds were to be seen, but in the roadstead off Coralio scarcely any save the fruiters paused. Now and then a tramp coaster, or a mysterious brig from Spain, and then a tramp coaster, or a mysterious brig from Spain, or a saucy French bark would hang innocently for a few days in the offing. Then the custom house crew would become doubly vigilant and wary. At night a sloop or two would be making strange trips in and out along the shore, and in the morning the stock of 3-star Hennessy, wines and dry goods in Coralio would be found vastly increased. It has also been said that the customs officials jingled more silver in the pockets of their red-striped trousers, and that the record books showed no increase in import duties received. The customs boat and the Valhalla gig reached the shore at the same time. When they grounded in the shallow water, there was still 5 yards of rolling surf between them and dry sand. Then half-clothed Caribs dashed into the water and brought in on their backs the Valhalla's purser, and the little native officials in their cotton undershirts, blue trousers with red stripes, and flapping straw hats. At college, Geddie had been a treasure as a first baseman. He now closed his umbrella, stuck it upright in the sand, and stooped, with his hands resting upon his knees. The purser, burlesquing the pitcher's contortions, hurled at the consul the heavy roll of newspapers, tied with a string, that the steamer always brought for him. Geddie leaped high and caught the roll with a sounding thwack. The loungers on the beach, about a third of the population of the town, laughed and applauded delightedly. Every week they expected to see that roll of papers delivered and received in that same manner, and they were never disappointed. Innovations did not flourish in Coralio. The consul rehoisted his umbrella and walked back to the consulate. This home of a great nation's representative was a wooden structure of 2 rooms, with a native-built gallery of poles, bamboo, and nipa palm running on 3 sides of it. One room was the official apartment, furnished chastely with a flat-top desk, a hammock, and 3 uncomfortable cane-seated chairs. Engravings of the first and latest president of the country represented hung against the wall. The other room was the consul's living apartment. It was 11 o'clock when he returned from the beach, and therefore breakfast time. Chanka, the Carib woman who cooked for him, was just serving the meal on the side of the gallery facing the CA spot famous as the coolest in Coralio. The breakfast consisted of shark's fin soup, stew of land crabs, breadfruit, a boiled iguana steak, aquacates, a freshly cut pineapple, claret, and coffee. Geddie took his seat and unrolled with luxurious laziness his bundle of newspapers. Here in Coralio for 2 days or longer, he would read the goings-on in the world very much as we of the world read those whimsical contributions to inexact science that assumed to portray the doings of the Martians. After he had finished with the papers, they would be sent on the rounds of the other English-speaking residents of the town. The paper that came first to his hand was one of those bulky mattresses of printed stuff upon which the readers of certain New York journals are supposed to take their Sabbath literary nap. Opening this, the consul rested it upon the table, supporting its weight with the aid of the back of a chair. Then he partook of his meal deliberately, turning the leaves from time to time and glancing half idly at the contents. Presently he was struck by something familiar to him in a picture, a half-page, badly printed reproduction of a photograph of a vessel. Languidly interested, he leaned for a nearer scrutiny and a view of the florid headlines of the column next to the picture. Yes, he was not mistaken. The engraving was of the 800-ton yacht Adalia, belonging to that prince of good fellows, Midas of the money market, and society's pink of perfection, J. Ward Tolliver. Slowly sipping his black coffee, Geddie read the column of print. Following a listed statement of Mr. Tolliver's real estate and bonds, came a description of the yacht's furnishings, and then the grain of news no bigger than a mustard seed. Mr. Tolliver, with a party of favored guests, would sail the next day on a 6 weeks cruise along the Central American and South American coasts and among the Bahama Islands. Among the guests were Mrs. Cumberland Payne and Miss Ida Payne of Norfolk. The writer, with the fatuous presumption that was demanded of him by his readers, had concocted a romance suited to their palates. He bracketed the names of Miss Payne and Mr. Tolliver until he had well-nigh read the marriage ceremony over them. He played coyly and insinuatingly upon the strings of On Dit and Madame Rumor and A Little Bird, and no one would be surprised, and ended with congratulations. Geddie, having finished his breakfast, took his papers to the edge of the gallery and sat there in his favorite steamer chair with his feet on the bamboo railing. He lighted a cigar and looked out upon the sea. He felt a glow of satisfaction at finding he was so little disturbed by what he had read. He told himself that he had conquered the distress that had sent him, a voluntary exile, to this far land of the Lotus. He could never forget Ida, of course, but there was no longer any pain in thinking about her. When they had had that misunderstanding and quarrel, he had impulsively sought this consulship, with the desire to retaliate upon her by detaching himself from her world and presence. He had succeeded thoroughly in that. During the 12 months of his life in Coralio, no word had passed between them, though he had sometimes heard of her through the dilatory correspondence with the few friends to whom he still wrote. Still, he could not repress a little thrill of satisfaction at knowing that she had not yet married Tolliver or anyone else. But evidently Tolliver had not yet abandoned hope. Well, it made no difference to him now. He had eaten of the Lotus. He was happy and content in this land of perpetual afternoon. Those old days of life in the States seemed like an irritating dream. He hoped Ida would be as happy as he was. The climate as balmy as that of distant Avalon. The fetterless, idyllic round of enchanted days. The life among this indolent, romantic people, a life full of music, flowers, and low laughter. The influence of the imminent sea and mountains, and the many shapes of love and magic and beauty that bloomed in the white tropic nights. With all, he was more than content. Also, there was Paula Brannigan. Geddie intended to marry Paula if, of course, she would consent. But he felt rather sure that she would do that. Somehow, he kept postponing his proposal. Several times he had been quite near to it, but a mysterious something always held him back. Perhaps it was only the unconscious, instinctive conviction that the act would sever the last tie that bound him to his old world. He could be very happy with Paula. Few of the native girls could be compared with her. She had attended a convent school in New Orleans for 2 years, and when she chose to display her accomplishments, no one could detect any difference between her and the girls of Norfolk and Manhattan. But it was delicious to see her at home dressed, as she sometimes was, in the native costume, with bare shoulders and flowing sleeves. Bernard Brannigan was the great merchant of Coralio. Besides his store, he maintained a train of pack mules and carried on a lively trade with the interior towns and villages. He had married a native lady of high Castilian descent, but with a tinge of Indian brown showing through her olive cheek. The union of the Irish and the Spanish had produced, as it so often has, an offshoot of rare beauty and variety. They were very excellent people indeed, and the upper story of the house was ready to be placed at the service of Geddie and Paula as soon as he should make up his mind to speak about it. By the time 2 hours were whiled away, the consul tired of reading. The papers lay scattered about him on the gallery. Reclining there, he gazed dreamily out upon an Eden. A clump of banana plants interposed their broad shields between him and the sun. The gentle slope from the consulate to the sea was covered with the dark green foliage of lemon trees and orange trees just bursting into bloom. A lagoon pierced the land like a dark, jagged crystal, and above it a pale ceiba tree rose almost to the clouds. The waving coconut palms on the beach flared their decorative green leaves against the slate of an almost quiescent sea. His senses were cognizant of brilliant scarlet and ochres and the vert of the coppice, of odors of fruit and bloom and the smoke from Chanka's clay oven under the calabash tree, of the treble laughter of the native women in their huts, the song of the robin, the salt taste of the breeze, the diminuendo of the faint surf running along the shore and, gradually, of a white speck, growing to a blur, that intruded itself upon the drab prospect of the sea. Lazily interested, he watched this blur increase until it became the Adalia steaming at full speed, coming down the coast. Without changing his position, he kept his eyes upon the beautiful white yacht as she drew swiftly near, and came opposite to Coralio. Then, sitting upright, he saw her float steadily past and on. He had seen the frequent splash of her polished brass work and the stripes of her deck awnings so much, and no more. Like a ship on a magic lantern slide, the Adalia had crossed the illuminated circle of the consul's little world and was gone. Save for the tiny cloud of smoke that was left hanging over the brim of the sea, she might have been an immaterial thing, a chimera of his idle brain. Geddie went into his office and sat down to dawdle over his report. If the reading of the article in the paper had left him unshaken, this silent passing of the Adalia had done for him still more. It had brought the calm and peace of a situation from which all uncertainty had been erased. He knew that men sometimes hope without being aware of it. Now, since she had come 2,000 miles and had passed without a sign, not even his unconscious self need cling to the past any longer. After dinner, when the sun was low behind the mountains, Geddie walked on the little strip of beach under the coconuts. The wind was blowing mildly landward, and the surface of the sea was rippled by tiny wavelets. A miniature breaker, spreading with a soft swish upon the sand, brought with it something round and shiny that rolled back again as the wave receded. The next influx beached it clear, and Geddie picked it up. The thing was a long-necked wine bottle of colorless glass. The cork had been driven in tightly to the level of the mouth, and the end covered with dark red sealing wax. The bottle contained only what seemed to be a sheet of paper, much curled from the manipulation it had undergone while being inserted. In the sealing wax was the impression of a seal, probably of a signet ring, bearing the initials of a monogram. But the impression had been hastily made, and the letters were past anything more certain than a shrewd conjecture. Ida Payne had always worn a signet ring in preference to any other finger decoration. Geddie thought he could make out the familiar IP, and a queer sensation of disquietude went over him. More personal and intimate was this reminder of her than had been the sight of the vessel she was doubtless on. He walked back to his house and set the bottle on his desk. Throwing off his hat and coat and lighting a lamp for the night had crowded precipitately upon the brief twilight, he began to examine his piece of sea salvage. By holding the bottle near the light and turning it judiciously, he made out that it contained a double sheet of notepaper filled with close writing. Further, that the paper was of the same size and shade as that always used by Ida, and that, to the best of his belief, the handwriting was hers. The imperfect glass of the bottle so distorted the rays of light that he could read no word of the writing. But certain capital letters, of which he caught comprehensive glimpses, were Ida's, he felt sure. There was a little smile both of perplexity and amusement in Geddie's eyes as he set the bottle down and laid 3 cigars side by side on his desk. He fetched his steamer chair from the gallery and stretched himself comfortably. He would smoke those 3 cigars while considering the problem. For it amounted to a problem. He almost wished that he had not found the bottle, but the bottle was there. Why should it have drifted in from the sea, whence come so many disquieting things, to disturb his peace? In this dreamy land, where time seemed so redundant, he had fallen into the habit of bestowing much thought upon even trifling matters. He began to speculate upon many fanciful theories concerning the story of the bottle, rejecting each in turn. Ships in danger of wreck or disablement sometimes cast forth such precarious messengers calling for aid. But he had seen the Adalia not 3 hours before, safe and speeding. Suppose the crew had mutinied and imprisoned the passengers below, and the message was one begging for succor. But, premising such an improbable outrage, would the agitated captives have taken the pains to fill 4 pages of notepaper with carefully pinned arguments to their rescue? Thus, by elimination, he soon rid the matter of the more unlikely theories, and was reduced though aversely to the less assailable ones that the bottle contained a message to himself. Ida knew he was in Coralio. She must have launched the bottle while the yacht was passing and the wind blowing fairly toward the shore. As soon as Geddie reached this conclusion, a wrinkle came between his brows and a stubborn look settled around his mouth. He sat looking out through the doorway at the gigantic fireflies traversing the quiet streets. If this was a message to him from Ida, what could it mean save an overture at reconciliation? And if that, why had she not used the same methods of the post instead of this uncertain and even flippant means of communication? A note in an empty bottle, cast into the sea. There was something light and frivolous about it, if not actually contemptuous. The thought stirred his pride and subdued whatever emotions had been resurrected by the finding of the bottle. Geddie put on his coat and hat and walked out. He followed a street that led him along the border of the little plaza where a band was playing and people were rambling, carefree and indolent. Some timorous señoritas scurrying past with fireflies tangled in the jetty braids of their hair glanced at him with shy, flattering eyes. The air was languorous with the scent of jasmine and orange blossoms. The consul stayed his steps at the house of Bernard Brannigan. Paula was swinging in a hammock on the gallery. She rose from it like a bird from its nest. The color came to her cheek at the sound of Geddie's voice. He was charmed at the sight of her costume-flounced muslin dress, with a little jacket of white flannel, all made with neatness and style. He suggested a stroll, and they walked out to the old Indian well on the hill road. They sat on the curb, and there Geddie made the expected but long-deferred speech. Certain though he had been that she would not say him nay, he was still thrilled at the completeness and sweetness of her surrender. Here was surely a heart made for love and steadfastness. Here was no caprice or questionings or captious standards of convention. When Geddie kissed Paula at her door that night, he was happier than he had ever been before. Here in this hollow Lotus land, ever to live and lie reclined seemed to him, as it has seemed to many mariners, the best as well as the easiest. His future would be an ideal one. He had attained a paradise without a serpent. His Eve would be indeed a part of him, unbeguiled, and therefore more beguiling. He had made his decision tonight, and his heart was full of serene, assured content. Geddie went back to his house whistling that finest and saddest love song, La Galandrina. At the door his tame monkey leaped down from his shelf, chattering briskly. The consul turned to his desk to get him some nuts he usually kept there. Reaching in the half-darkness, his hand struck against the bottle. He started as if he had touched the cold rotundity of a serpent. He had forgotten that the bottle was there. He lighted the lamp and fed the monkey. Then, very deliberately, he lighted a cigar and took the bottle in his hand and walked down the path to the beach. There was a moon, and the sea was glorious. The breeze had shifted, as it did each evening, and was now rushing steadily seaward. Stepping to the water's edge, Geddie hurled the unopened bottle far out into the sea. It disappeared for a moment, and then shot upward twice its length. Geddie stood still, watching it. The moonlight was so bright that he could see it bobbing up and down with the little waves. Slowly it receded from the shore, flashing and turning as it went. The wind was carrying it out to sea. Soon it became a mere speck, doubtfully discerned at irregular intervals. And then the mystery of it was swallowed up by the greater mystery of the ocean. Geddie stood still upon the beach, smoking and looking out upon the water. "Simon! Oh, Simon! Wake up there, Simon!" bawled a sonorous voice at the edge of the water. Old Simon Cruz was a half-breed fisherman and smuggler who lived in a hut on the beach. Out of his earliest nap Simon was thus awakened. He slipped on his shoes and went outside. Just landing from one of the Valhalla's boats was the third mate of that vessel, who was an acquaintance of Simon's, and 3 sailors from the fruiter. "Go up, Simon," called the mate, "and find Dr. Gregg or Mr. Goodwin, or anybody that's a friend to Mr. Geddie, and bring him here at once." "Saints of the skies," said Simon, sleepily. "Nothing has happened to Mr. Geddie?" "He's under that tarpauling," said the mate, pointing to the boat, "and he's rather more than half drowned. We seen him from the steamer nearly a mile out from shore, swimming like mad after a bottle that was floatin' in the water, outward bound. We lowered the gig and started for him. He nearly had his hand on the bottle, when he gave out and went under. We pulled him out in time to save him, maybe, but the doctor is the one to decide that." "A bottle," said the old man, rubbing his eyes. He was not yet fully awake. "Where is the bottle?" "Driftin' along out there summaries," said the mate, jerking his thumb toward the sea. "Get on with you, Simon." The Lost Blend by O. Henry. Since the bar has been blessed by the clergy, and cocktails open the dinners of the elect, one may speak of the saloon. Teetotalers need not listen, if they choose. There is always the slot restaurant, where a dime dropped into the cold bouillon aperture will bring forth a dry martini. Con Lantry worked on the sober side of the bar in Keneally's Cafe. You and I stood, one-legged like geese, on the other side and went into voluntary liquidation with our week's wages. Opposite danced Con, clean, temperate, clear-headed, polite, white-jacketed, punctual, trustworthy, young, responsible, and took our money. The saloon, whether blessed or cursed, stood in one of those little places which are parallelograms instead of streets, and inhabited by laundries, decayed Knickerbocker families and bohemians who have nothing to do with either. Over the cafe lived Keneally and his family. His daughter Catherine had eyes of dark Irish, but why should you be told? Be content with your Geraldine or your Eliza, for Con dreamed of her, and when she called softly at the foot of the back stairs for the pitcher of beer for dinner, his heart went up and down like a milk punch in the shaker. Orderly and fit are the rules of romance, and if you hurl the last shilling of your fortune upon the bar for whiskey, the bartender shall take it and marry his boss's daughter, and good will grow out of it. But not so Con, for in the presence of woman he was tongue-tied and scarlet. He who would quell with his eye the sonorous youth whom the claret punch made loquacious, or smash with lemon squeezer the obstreperous, or hurl gutterward the cantankerous without a wrinkle coming to his white lawn tie, when he stood before woman he was voiceless, incoherent, stuttering, buried beneath a hot avalanche of bashfulness and misery. What then was he before Catherine? A trembler, with no word to say for himself, a stone without blarney, the dumbest lover that ever babbled of the weather in the presence of his divinity. There came to Keneally's 2 sunburned men, Riley and McQuirk. They had conference with Keneally, And then they took possession of a back room which they filled with bottles and siphons and jugs and druggists' measuring glasses. All the appurtenances and liquids of a saloon were there, but they dispensed no drinks. All day long the two sweltered in their pouring and mixing unknown brews and decoctions from the liquors in their store. Riley had the education, and he figured on reams of paper, reducing gallons to ounces and quarts to fluid drams. McQuirk, a morose man with a red eye, dashed each unsuccessful completed mixture into the waste pipes with curses gentle, husky, and deep. They labored heavily and untiringly to achieve some mysterious solution, like two alchemists striving to resolve gold from the elements. Into this back room one evening when his watch was done sauntered Con. His professional curiosity had been stirred by these occult bartenders at whose bar none drank, and who daily drew upon Keneally's store of liquors to follow their consuming and fruitless experiments. Down the back stairs came Catherine with her smile like sunrise on Guibera Bay. "Good evening, Mr. Lantry," says she. "And what is the news today, if you please?" "It looks like our rain," stammered the shy one, backing to the wall. "It couldn't do better," said Catherine. "I'm thinking there's nothing the worse off for a little water." In the back room Riley and McQuirk toiled like bearded witches over their strange compounds. From 50 bottles they drew liquids carefully measured after Riley's figures, and shook the whole together in a great glass vessel. Then McQuirk would dash it out, with gloomy profanity, and they would begin again. "Sit down," said Riley to Con, "and I'll tell you. Last summer me and Tim concludes that an American bar in this nation of Nicaragua would pay. There was a town on the coast where there's nothing to eat but quinine, and nothing to drink but rum. The natives and foreigners lay down with chills and get up with fevers, and a good mixed drink is nature's remedy for all such tropical inconveniences. So we lays in a fine stock of wet goods in New York, and bar fixtures and glassware, and we sails for that Santa Palma town on a lime steamer. On the way me and Tim sees flying fish and plays 7-up with the captain and steward, and already begins to feel like the highball kings of the tropics of Capricorn. When we gets in 5 hours of the country that we was going to introduce to long drinks and short change, the captain calls us over to the starboard binnacle and recollects a few things. "I forgot to tell you, boys," says he, "that Nicaragua slapped an import duty of 48% ad valorem on all bottled goods last month. The president took a bottle of Cincinnati hair tonic by mistake for Tabasco sauce, and he's getting even. Barreled goods is free." "Sorry you didn't mention it sooner," says we, and we bought 2 42-gallon casks from the captain and opened every bottle we had and dumped the stuff all together in the casks. That 48% would have ruined us. So we took the chances on making that $1,200 cocktail rather than throw the stuff away. Well, when we landed we tapped one of the barrels. The mixture was something heartrending. It was the color of a plate of Bowery pea soup, and it tasted like one of those coffee substitutes your aunt makes you take for the heart trouble you get by picking losers. We gave A.N. 4 fingers of it to try it, and he lay under a coconut tree 3 days beating the sand with his heels and refused to sign a testimonial. But the other barrel, say, bartender, did you ever put on a straw hat with a yellow band around it and go up in a balloon with a pretty girl with $8 million in your pocket all at the same time? That's what 30 drops of it would make you feel like. With 2 fingers of it inside you, you would bury your face in your hands and cry because there wasn't anything more worthwhile around for you to lick than little Jim Jeffries. Yes, sir, the stuff in that second barrel was distilled elixir of battle, money, and high life. It was the color of gold and as clear as glass, and it shone after dark like the sunshine was still in it. 1,000 years from now, you'll get a drink like that across the bar. Well, we started up business with that one line of drinks, and it was enough. The piebald gentry of that country stuck to it like a hive of bees. If that barrel had lasted, that country would have become the greatest on earth. When we opened up of mornings, we had a line of generals and colonels and ex-presidents and revolutionists a block long waiting to be served. We started in at 50 cents silver a drink. The last 10 gallons went easy at $5 a gulp. It was wonderful stuff. It gave a man courage and ambition and nerve to do anything. At the same time, he didn't care whether his money was tainted or fresh from the ice trust. When that barrel was half gone, Nicaragua had repudiated the national debt, removed the duty on cigarettes, and was about to declare war on the United States and England. 'Twas by accident we discovered this king of drinks, and 'twill be by good luck if we strike it again. For 10 months we've been trying, small lots at a time. We've mixed barrels of all the harmful ingredients known to the profession of drinking. You could have stocked tin bars with the whiskeys, brandies, cordials, bitters, gins, and wines me and Tim have wasted. A glorious drink like that to be denied to the world. 'Tis a sorrow and a loss of money. The United States as a nation would welcome a drink of that sort and pay for it. All the while McQuirk lead been carefully measuring and pouring together small quantities of various spirits, as Riley called them, from his latest penciled prescription. The completed mixture was of a vile, mottled chocolate color. McQuirk tasted it and hurled it, with appropriate epithets, into the waste sink. "'Tis a strange story, even if true," said Con. "I'll be going now along to my supper." "Take a drink," said Riley. "We've all kinds except the lost blend." "I never drink," said Con, "anything stronger than water. I am just after meeting Miss Catherine by the stairs. She said a true word. 'There's not anything,' says she, 'but is better off for a little water.'" When Con had left them, Riley almost felled McQuirk by a blow on the back. "Did ye hear that?" he shouted. "Two fools are we. The 6 dozen bottles of Apollinaris we had on the slip, ye opened them yourself. Which barrel did ye pour them in? Which barrel, ye mudhead?" "I mind," said McQuirk, slowly. "'Twas in the second barrel we opened. I mind the blue piece of paper pasted on the side of it." "We've got it now," cried Riley. "'Twas that we lacked. 'Tis the water that does the trick. Everything else we had right. Hurry, man, and get 2 bottles of Apollinaris from the bar, while I figure out the proportionments with me pencil." An hour later Con strolled down the sidewalk toward Keneally's cafe. Thus faithful employees haunt, during their recreation hours, the vicinity where they labor, drawn by some mysterious attraction. A police patrol wagon stood at the side door. 3 able cops were half carrying, half hustling Riley and McQuirk up its rear steps. The eyes and faces of each bore the bruises and cuts of sanguinary and assiduous conflict. Yet they whooped with strange joy and directed upon the police the feeble remnants of their pugnacious madness. "Began fighting each other in the back room," explained Keneally to Con, "and singing. That was worse. Smashed everything pretty much up. But they're good men. They'll pay for everything. Trying to invent some new kind of cocktail. I'll see they come out all right in the morning." Con sauntered into the back room to view the battlefield. As he went through the hall, Catherine was just coming down the stairs. "Good evening again, Mr. Lantry," said she. "And is there no news from the weather yet?" "Still threatens our rain," said Con, slipping past with red in his smooth, pale cheek. Riley and McQuirk had indeed waged a great and friendly battle. Broken bottles and glasses were everywhere. The room was full of alcohol fumes. The floor was variegated with spirituous puddles. On the table stood a 32-ounce glass graduated measure. In the bottom of it were 2 tablespoonfuls of a bright golden liquid that seemed to hold the sunshine a prisoner in its auriferous depths. Con smelled it. He tasted it. He drank it. As he returned through the hall, Catherine was just going up the stairs. "No news yet, Mr. Lantry?" she asked with her teasing laugh. Con lifted her clear from the floor and held her there. "The news is," he said, "that we're to be married." "Put me down, sir," she cried indignantly, "or I will—" "Oh, Con, wherever did you get the nerve to say it?" "The Lonesome Road, by O. Henry." Brown as a coffee berry, rugged, pistoled, spurred, wary, indefeasible, I saw my old friend, Deputy Marshal Buck Caperton, stumble, with jingling rowels, into a chair in the marshal's outer office. And because the courthouse was almost deserted at that hour, and because Buck would sometimes relate to me things that were out of print, I followed him in and tricked him into talk through knowledge of a weakness he had. For cigarettes rolled with sweet corn husk were as honey to Buck's palate, and though he could finger the trigger of a .45 with skill and suddenness, he never could learn to roll a cigarette. It was through no fault of mine, for I rolled the cigarettes tight and smooth, but the upshot of some whim of his own, that instead of to an odyssey of the chaparral, I listened to a dissertation upon matrimony. This from Buck Caperton. But I maintain that the cigarettes were impeccable and crave absolution for myself. We just brought in Jim and Bud Granberry, said Buck. Train robbing, you know. Held up the Aransas Pass last month. We caught M in the 20-mile pear flat, south of the New Oasis. Have much trouble corralling them? I asked, for here was the meat that my hunger for epics craved. Some, said Buck, and then, during a little pause, his thoughts stampeded off the trail. It's kind of queer about women, he went on, and the place they're supposed to occupy in botany. If I was asked to classify them, I'd say they was a human loco weed. Ever see a bronc that had been chewing loco? Ride him up to a puddle of water 2 feet wide, and he'll give a snort and fall back on you. It looks as big as the Mississippi River to him. Next trip, he'd walk into a canyon 1,000 feet deep thinking it was a prairie dog hole. Same way with a married man. I was thinking of Perry Roundtree, that used to be my sidekicker before he committed matrimony. In them days me and Perry hated indisturbances of any kind. We roamed around considerable, stirring up the echoes and making him attend to business. Why, when me and Perry wanted to have some fun in a town, it was a picnic for the census takers. They just counted the marshal's posse that it took to subdue us, and there was your population. But then there came along this Mariana Goodnight girl and looked at Perry sideways, and he was all bridle-wise and saddle-broke before you could skin a yearling. I wasn't even asked to the wedding. I reckon the bride had my pedigree and the front elevation of my habits all mapped out, and she decided that Perry would trot better in double harness without any unconverted Mustang like Buck Caperton wickering around on the matrimonial range. So it was 6 months before I saw Perry again. One day I was passing on the edge of town, and I see something like a man in a little yard by a little house with a sprinkling pot squirting water on a rose bush. Seemed to me I'd seen something like it before, and I stopped at the gate, trying to figure out its brands. 'Twas not Perry Roundtree, but 'twas the kind of a curdled jellyfish matrimony had made out of him. Homicide was what that Mariana had perpetrated. He was looking well enough, but he had on a white collar and shoes, and you could tell in a minute that he'd speak polite and pay taxes and stick his little finger out while drinking, just like a sheep man or a citizen. Great skyrockets. But I hated to see Perry all corrupted and willy-eyed like that. He came out to the gate and shook hands, and I says with scorn, and speaking like a paraquet with the pip, "Beg pardon, Mr. Roundtree, I believe. Seems to me I satiated in your associations once, if I am not mistaken." "Oh, go to the devil, Buck," says Perry, polite, as I was afraid he'd be. "Well, then," says I, "you poor, contaminated adjunct of a sprinkling pot and degraded household pet, what did you go and do it for? Look at you, all decent and unriotous, and only fit to sit on juries and mend the woodhouse door. You was a man once. I have hostility for all such acts. Why don't you go in the house and count the tidies or set the clock, and not stand out here in the atmosphere? A jackrabbit might come along and bite you." "Now, Buck," says Perry, speaking mild and some sorrowful, "you don't understand. A married man has got to be different. He feels different from a tough old cloudburst like you. It's sinful to waste time pulling up towns just to look at their roots, and playing Pharaoh and looking upon red liquor, and such restless policies as them. There was a time," I says, and I expect I sighed when I mentioned it, "when a certain domesticated little Mary's lamb I could name was some instructed himself in the line of pernicious sprightliness. I never expected, Perry, to see you reduced down from a full-grown pestilence to such a frivolous fraction of a man. Why," says I, "you've got a necktie on, and you speak a senseless kind of indoor drivel that reminds me of a storekeeper or a lady. You look to me like you might tote an umbrella and wear suspenders and go home of nights." "The little woman," says Perry, "has made some improvements, I believe. You can't understand, Buck. I haven't been away from the house at night since we was married." We talked on a while, me and Perry, and as sure as I live, that man interrupted me in the middle of my talk to tell me about 6 tomato plants he had growing in his garden. Shoved his agricultural degradation right up under my nose while I was telling him about the fun we had tarring and feathering that faro dealer at California Pete's layout. But by and by Perry shows a flicker of sense. "Buck," says he, "I'll have to admit that it is a little dull at times. Not that I'm not perfectly happy with the little woman, but a man seems to require some excitement now and then. Now, I'll tell you. Mariana's gone visiting this afternoon, and she won't be home till 7 o'clock. Neither of us ever stays out a minute after that time, unless we are together. Now, I'm glad you came along, Buck, says Perry, for I'm feeling just like having one more rip-roaring razoo with you for the sake of old times. What you say to us putting in the afternoon having fun ID like it fine, says Perry. I slapped that old captive range rider half across his little garden. Get your hat, you old dried-up alligator, I shouts, you ain't dead yet. You're part human, anyhow, if you did get all bogged up in matrimony. We'll take this town to pieces and see what makes it tick. We'll make all kinds of profligate demands upon the science of cork pulling. You'll grow horns yet, old muley cow, says I, punching Perry in the ribs, if you trot around on the trail of vice with your Uncle Buck. I'll have to be home by 7, you know, says Perry again. Oh, yes, says I, winking to myself, for I knew the kind of 7 o'clocks Perry Roundtree got back by after he once got to passing repartee with the bartenders. We goes down to the Gray Mule Saloon, that old dough building by the depot. Give it a name, says I, as soon as we got one hoof on the foot, rest. Sarsaparilla, says Perry. You could have knocked me down with a lemon peeling. Insult me as much as you want to, I says to Perry, but don't startle the bartender. He may have heart disease. Come on, now. Your tongue got twisted. The tall glasses, I orders, and the bottle in the left-hand corner of the ice chest. Sarsaparilla, repeats Perry, and then his eyes get animated, and I see he's got some great scheme in his mind he wants to emit. Buck, says he, all interested, I'll tell you what, I want to make this a red-letter day. I've been keeping close at home, and I want to turn myself loose. We'll have the highest old time you ever saw. We'll go in the back room here and play checkers till 6:30. I leaned against the bar, and I says to gotch-eared Mike, who was on watch, for God's sake don't mention this. You know what Perry used to be. He's had the fever, and the doctor says we must humor him. Give us the checkerboard and the men, Mike, says Perry. Come on, Buck, I'm just wild to have some excitement. I went in the back room with Perry. Before we closed the door, I says to Mike, don't ever let it straggle out from under your hat that you seen Buck Caperton fraternal with sarsaparilla or / persona grata / with a checkerboard, or I'll make a swallow fork in your other ear. I locked the door and me and Perry played checkers. To see that poor old humiliated piece of household bric-a-brac sitting there and sniggering out loud whenever he jumped a man, and all obnoxious with animation when he got into my king row, would have made a sheepdog sick with mortification. Him that was once satisfied only when he was pegging 6 boards at Keno, or giving the faro dealers nervous prostration, to see him pushing them checkers about like Sally Louisa at a school children's party. Why, I was all smothered up with mortification. And I sits there playing the black men, all sweating for fear somebody I knew would find it out. And I thinks to myself some about this marrying business, and how it seems to be the same kind of a game as that Mrs. Delilah played. She give her old man a haircut, and everybody knows what a man's head looks like after a woman cuts his hair. And then when the Pharisees came around to guy him, he was so shamed that he went to work and kicked the whole house down on top of the whole outfit. Them married men, thinks I, lose all their spirit and instinct for riot and foolishness. They won't drink, they won't buck the tiger, they won't even fight. What do they want to go and stay married for? I asks myself. But Perry seems to be having hilarity in considerable quantities. Buck old hoss, says he, isn't this just the hell-roaringest time we ever had in our lives? I don't know when I've been stirred up so. You see, I've been sticking pretty close to home since I married, and I haven't been on a spree in a long time. Spree? Yes, that's what he called it. Playing checkers in the back room of the Gray Mule. I suppose it did seem to him a little more immoral and nearer to a prolonged debauch than standing over 6 tomato plants with a sprinkling pot. Every little bit Perry looks at his watch and says, I got to be home, you know, Buck, at 7. All right, I'd say. Romp along and move. This here excitement's killing me. If I don't reform some, and loosen up the strain of this checkered dissipation, I won't have a nerve left. It might have been 6:30 when commotions began to go on outside in the street. We heard a yelling and a six-shootering, and a lot of galloping and maneuvers. What's that? I wonders. Oh, some nonsense outside, says Perry. It's your move. We just got time to play this game. I'll just take a peep through the window, says I, and see. You can't expect a mere mortal to stand the excitement of having a king jumped and listen to an unidentified conflict going on at the same time. The Gray Mule Saloon was one of them old Spanish dough buildings, and the back room only had two little windows a foot wide, with iron bars in 'em. I looked out one, and I see the cause of the ruckus. There was the Trimble gang, 10 of 'em, the worst outfit of desperados and horse thieves in Texas, coming up the street shooting right and left. They was coming right straight for the Gray Mule. Then they got past the range of my sight, but we heard 'em ride up to the front door, and then they socked the place full of lead. We heard the big looking glass behind the bar knocked all to pieces and the bottles crashing. We could see gotch-eared Mike in his apron running across the plaza like a coyote, with the bullets puffing up dust all around him. Then the gang went to work in the saloon, drinking what they wanted and smashing what they didn't. Me and Petty both knew that gang, and they knew us. The year before Perry married, him and me was in the same ranger company, and we fought that outfit down on the San Miguel and brought back Ben Trimble and two others for murder. We can't get out, says I. We'll have to stay in here till they leave. Perry looked at his watch. 7:25, says he. We can finish that game. I got 2 men on you. It's your move, Buck. I gotta be home at 7, you know. We sat down and went on playing. The Trimble gang had a rough house for sure. They were getting good and drunk. They'd drink a while and holler a while, and then they'd shoot up a few bottles and glasses. 2 or 3 times they came and tried to open our door. Then there was some more shooting outside, and I looked out the window again. Ham Gossett, the town marshal, had a posse in the houses and stores across the street, and was trying to bag a Trimble or 2 through the windows. I lost that game of checkers. I'm free in saying that I lost 3 kings that I might have saved if I had been corralled in a more peaceful pasture. But that driveling married man sat there and cackled when he won a man like an unintelligent hen picking up a grain of corn. When the game was over, Perry gets up and looks at his watch. I've had a glorious time, Buck, says he, but I'll have to be going now. It's 6:45, and I gotta be home by 7, you know. I thought he was joking. They'll clear out or be dead drunk in half an hour or an hour, says I. You ain't that tired of being married that you want to commit any more sudden suicide, are you? Says I, giving him the laugh. One time, says Perry, I was half an hour late getting home. I met Mariana on the street looking for me. If you could have seen her, Buck, but you don't understand. She knows what a wild kind of a snoozer I've been, and she's afraid something will happen. I'll never be late getting home again. I'll say goodbye to you now, Buck. I got between him and the door. Married man, says I know you was christened a fool the minute the preacher tangled you up, but don't you never sometimes think one little think on a human basis? There's 10 of that gang in there, and they're pizen with whiskey and desire for murder. They'll drink you up like a bottle of booze before you get halfway to the door. Be intelligent, now, and use at least wild hog sense. Sit down and wait till we have some chance to get out without being carried in baskets. I got to be home by 7, Buck, repeats this henpecked thing of little wisdom, like an unthinking poll parrot. Mariana, says he, will be out looking for me. And he reaches down and pulls a leg out of the checker table. I'll go through this Trimble outfit, says he, like a cottontail through a brush corral. I'm not pestered any more with a desire to engage in rucuses, but I got to be home by 7. You lock the door after me, Buck. And don't you forget I won 3 out of them 5 games. I'd play longer, but Mariana. Hush up, you old locoed road runner, I interrupts. Did you ever notice your Uncle Buck locking doors against trouble? I'm not married, says I, but I'm as big a D.N. fool as any Mormon. 1 from 4 leaves 3, says I, and I gathers out another leg of the table. We'll get home by 7, says I, whether it's the heavenly one or the other. May I see you home, says I, you sarsaparilla, drinking, checker-playing glutton for death and destruction. We opened the door easy, and then stampeded for the front. Part of the gang was lined up at the bar. Part of him was passing over the drinks, and 2 or 3 was peeping out the door and window and taking shots at the marshal's crowd. The room was so full of smoke, we got halfway to the front door before they noticed us. Then I heard Barry Trimble's voice somewhere yell out, "How'd that Buck Caperton get in here?" And he skinned the side of my neck with a bullet. I reckon he felt bad over that miss, for Barry's the best shot south of the Southern Pacific Railroad. But the smoke in the saloon was some too thick for good shooting. Me and Perry smashed over 2 of the gang with our table legs, which didn't miss like the guns did, and as we run out the door I grabbed a Winchester from a fellow who was watching the outside, and I turned and regulated the account of Mr. Barry. Me and Perry got out and around the corner all right. I never much expected to get out, but I wasn't going to be intimidated by that married man. According to Perry's idea, checkers was the event of the day, but if I am any judge of gentle recreations, that little table leg parade through the Gray Mule Saloon deserved the headlines in the bill of particulars. "Walk fast," says Perry. "It's 2 minutes to 7, and I gotta be home by—" "Oh, shut up," says I. "I had an appointment as chief performer at an inquest at 7, and I'm not kicking about not keeping it." I had to pass by Perry's little house. His Mariana was standing at the gate. We got there at 5 minutes past 7. She had on a blue wrapper, and her hair was pulled back smooth like little girls do when they want to look grown folksy. She didn't see us till we got close, for she was gazing up the other way. Then she backed around and saw Perry, and a kind of a look scooted around over her face dongate, if I can describe it. I heard her breathe long, just like a cow when you turn her calf in the lot, and she says, "You're late, Perry." "5 minutes," says Perry, cheerful. Me and old Buck was having a game of checkers. Perry introduces me to Mariana, and they ask me to come in. No, siree. I'd had enough truck with married folks for that day. I says I'll be going along, and that I've spent a very pleasant afternoon with my old partner, especially, says I, just to jostle Perry, during that game when the table legs came all loose. But I'd promised him not to let her know anything. "I've been worrying over that business ever since it happened," continued Buck. "There's one thing about it that's got me all twisted up, and I can't figure it out." "What was that?" I asked, as I rolled and handed Buck the last cigarette. "Why, I'll tell you. When I saw the look that little woman gave Perry when she turned round and saw him coming back to the ranch safe, why, was it I got the idea all in a minute that that look of hers was worth more than the whole caboodle of us umbrella, checkers and all, and that the d*n fool in the game wasn't named Perry Roundtree at all? The Last of the Troubadours, by O. Henry. Inexorably, Sam Galloway saddled his pony. He was going away from the Rancho Altito at the end of a 3-month visit. It is not to be expected that a guest should put up with wheat coffee and biscuits, yellow-streaked with saleratus, for longer than that. Nick Napoleon, the big Negro man cook, had never been able to make good biscuits. Once before, when Nick was cooking at the Willow Ranch, Sam had been forced to fly from his own after only a 6-week sojourn. On Sam's face was an expression of sorrow, deepened with regret and slightly tempered by the patient forgiveness of a connoisseur who cannot be understood. But very firmly and inexorably he buckled his saddle cinches, looped his stake rope and hung it to his saddle horn, tied his slicker and coat on the cantle, and looped his quirt on his right wrist. The Meridas, householders of the Rancho Altito, men, women, children, and servants, vassals, visitors, employees, dogs, and casual callers were grouped in the gallery of the ranch house, all with faces set to the tune of melancholy and grief. For, as the coming of Sam Galloway to any ranch, camp, or cabin between the rivers Frio or Bravo del Norte aroused joy, so his departure caused mourning and distress. And then, during absolute silence, except for the bumping of a hind elbow of a hound dog as he pursued a wicked flea, Sam tenderly and carefully tied his guitar across his saddle on top of his slicker and coat. The guitar was in a green duck bag, and if you catch the significance of it, it explains Sam. Sam Galloway was the last of the troubadours. Of course you know about the troubadours. The encyclopedia says they flourished between the 11th and the 13th centuries. What they flourished doesn't seem clear. You may be pretty sure it wasn't a sword. Maybe it was a fiddle bow, or a forkful of spaghetti, or a lady's scarf. Anyhow, Sam Galloway was one of M. Sam put on a martyred expression as he mounted his pony. But the expression on his face was hilarious compared with the one on his pony's. You see, a pony gets to know his rider mighty well, and it is not unlikely that cow ponies in pastures and at hitching racks had often guyed Sam's pony for being ridden by a guitar player instead of by a rollicking, cussing, all-wool cowboy. No man is a hero to his saddle horse. And even an escalator in a department store might be excused for tripping up a troubadour. Oh, I know I'm one. And so are you. You remember the stories you memorize and the card tricks you study and that little piece on the piano. How does it go? Ti-tum ti-tum ti-tum. Those little Arabian 10-minute entertainments that you furnish when you go up to call on your rich Aunt Jane. You should know that Unthoni Personi and Trace Parties Devisi, son under, namely, bronze, troubadours, and workers. Barons have no inclination to read such falderal as this, and workers have no time. So I know you must be a troubadour, and that you will understand Sam Galloway. Whether we sing, act, dance, write, lecture, or paint, we are only troubadours, so let us make the worst of it. The pony with the Dante Alighieri face, guided by the pressure of Sam's knees, bore that wandering minstrel 16 miles southeastward. Nature was in her most benignant mood. League after league of delicate, sweet flowerets made fragrant the gently undulating prairie. The east wind tempered the spring warmth. Wool-white clouds flying in from the Mexican Gulf hindered the direct rays of the April sun. Sam sang songs as he rode. Under his pony's bridle, he had tucked some sprigs of chaparral to keep away the deer flies. Thus crowned, the long-faced quadruped looked more dantesque than before, and, judging by his countenance, seemed to think of Beatrice. Straight as topography permitted, Sam rode to the sheep ranch of Old Man Ellison. A visit to a sheep ranch seemed to him desirable just then. There had been too many people, too much noise, argument, competition, confusion, at Rancho Altido. He had never conferred upon Old Man Ellison the favor of sojourning at his ranch, but he knew he would be welcome. The troubadour is his own passport everywhere. The workers in the castle let down the drawbridge to him, and the baron sets him at his left hand at table in the banquet hall. Their ladies smile upon him and applaud his songs and stories, while the workers bring boars' heads and flagons. If the baron nods once or twice in his carved oaken chair, he does not do it maliciously. Old Man Ellison welcomed the troubadour flatteringly. He had often heard praises of Sam Galloway from other ranchmen who had been complimented by his visits, but had never aspired to such an honor for his own humble barony. I say barony because Old Man Ellison was the last of the barons. Of course, Mr. Bulwer Lytton lived too early to know him, or he wouldn't have conferred that sobriquet upon Warwick. In life, it is the duty and the function of the baron to provide work for the workers and lodging and shelter for the troubadours. Old Man Ellison was a shrunken old man, with a short, yellow-white beard and a face lined and seamed by past and gone smiles. His ranch was a little two-room box house in a grove of hackberry trees in the lonesomest part of the sheep country. His household consisted of a Kiowa Indian man cook, 4 hounds, a pet sheep, and a half-tamed coyote chained to a fence post. He owned 3,000 sheep, which he ran on 2 sections of leased land and many thousands of acres neither leased nor owned. 3 or 4 times a year, someone who spoke his language would ride up to his gate and exchange a few bald ideas with him. Those were red-letter days to Old Man Ellison. Then in what illuminated, embossed, and gorgeously decorated capitals must have been written the day on which a troubadour who, according to the encyclopedia, should have flourished between the 11th and the 13th centuries, drew rein at the gates of his baronial castle. Old Man Ellison's smiles came back and filled his wrinkles when he saw Sam. He hurried out of the house in his shuffling, limping way to greet him. "Hello, Mr. Ellison," called Sam cheerfully. "Thought I'd drop over and see you a while. Notice you've had fine rains on your range. They ought to make good grazing for your spring lambs." "Well, well, well," said Old Man Ellison. "I'm mighty glad to see you, Sam. I never thought you'd take the trouble to ride over to as out-of-the-way an old ranch as this, but you're mighty welcome. Light, I've got a sack of new oats in the kitchen. Shall I bring out a feed for your hoss?" "Oats for him," said Sam, derisively. "No, sirree. He's as fat as a pig now on grass. He don't get rode enough to keep him in condition. I'll just turn him in the horse pasture with a drag rope on if you don't mind. I am positive that never during the 11th and 13th centuries did baron, troubadour, and worker amalgamate as harmoniously as their parallels did that evening at Old Man Ellison's sheep ranch. The Kiowa's biscuits were light and tasty, and his coffee strong. Ineradicable hospitality and appreciation glowed on Old Man Ellison's weather-tanned face. As for the troubadour, he said to himself that he had stumbled upon pleasant places indeed. A well-cooked, abundant meal, a host whom his lightest attempt to entertain seemed to delight far beyond the merits of the exertion, and the reposeful atmosphere that his sensitive soul at that time craved united to confer upon him a satisfaction and luxurious ease that he had seldom found on his tours of the ranches. After the delectable supper, Sam untied the green duck bag and took out his guitar. Not by way of payment, mind you. Neither Sam Galloway nor any other of the true troubadours are lineal descendants of the late Tommy Tucker. You have read of Tommy Tucker in the works of the esteemed but often obscure Mother Goose. Tommy Tucker sang for his supper. No true troubadour would do that. He would have his supper and then sing for art's sake. Sam Galloway's repertoire comprised about 50 funny stories and between 30 and 40 songs. He by no means stopped there. He could talk through 20 cigarettes on any topic that you brought up, and he never sat up when he could lie down, and never stood when he could sit. I am strongly disposed to linger with him, for I am drawing a portrait as well as a blunt pencil and a tattered thesaurus will allow. I wish you could have seen him. He was small and tough and inactive beyond the power of imagination to conceive. He wore an ultramarine blue woolen shirt laced down the front with a pearl gray, exaggerated sort of shoestring, indestructible brown duck clothes, inevitable high-heeled boots with Mexican spurs, and a Mexican straw sombrero. That evening Sam and Old Man Ellison dragged their chairs out under the hackberry trees. They lighted cigarettes, and the troubadour gaily touched his guitar. Many of the songs he sang were the weird, melancholy, minor-keyed he had learned from the Mexican sheep herders and one, in particular, charmed and soothed the soul of the lonely baron. It was a favorite song of the sheep herders, beginning, while, Palomita, which being translated means, fly, fly, little dove. Sam sang it for Old Man Ellison many times that evening. The troubadour stayed on at the old man's ranch. There was peace and quiet and appreciation there, such as he had not found in the noisy camps of the cattle kings. No audience in the world could have crowned the work of poet, musician, or artist with more worshipful and unflagging approval than that bestowed upon his efforts by Old Man Ellison. No visit by a royal personage to a humble woodchopper or peasant could have been received with more flattering thankfulness and joy. On a cool, canvas-covered cot in the shade of the hackberry trees, Sam Galloway passed the greater part of his time. There he rolled his brown paper cigarettes, read such tedious literature as the ranch afforded, and added to his repertoire of improvisations that he played so expertly on his guitar. To him, as a slave ministering to a great lord, the Kiowa brought cool water from the red jar hanging under the brush shelter, and food when he called for it. The prairie zephyrs fanned him mildly. Mockingbirds at morn and eve competed with but scarce equaled the sweet melodies of his lyre. A perfumed stillness seemed to fill all his world. While Old Man Ellison was pottering among his flocks of sheep on his mile-an-hour pony, and while the Kiowa took his siesta in the burning sunshine at the end of the kitchen, Sam would lie on his cot thinking what a happy world he lived in, and how kind it is to the ones whose mission in life it is to give entertainment and pleasure. Here he had food and lodging as good as he had ever longed for, absolute immunity from care or exertion or strife, an endless welcome, and a host whose delight at the 16th repetition of a song or a story was as keen as at its initial giving. Was there ever a troubadour of old who struck upon as royal a castle in his wanderings? While he lay thus, meditating upon his blessings, little brown cottontails would shyly frolic through the yard. A covey of white topknot blue quail would run past, in single file, 20 yards away. Out hunting for tarantulas, would hop upon the fence and salute him with sweeping flourishes of its long tail. In the 80-acre horse pasture the pony with the dantesque face grew fat, and almost smiling. The troubadour was at the end of his wanderings. Old Man Ellison was his own consul. That means that he supplied his sheep camps with wood, water, and rations by his own labors instead of hiring a consul. On small ranches it is often done. One morning he started for the camp of Encarnacion Felipe de la Cruz y Montepiedras, one of his sheep herders, with the week's usual rations of brown beans, coffee, meal, and sugar. 2 miles away on the trail from Old Fort Ewing he met, face to face, a terrible being called King James, mounted on a fiery, prancing, Kentucky-bred horse. King James's real name was James King, but people reversed it because it seemed to fit him better and also because it seemed to please His Majesty. King James was the biggest cattleman between the Alamo Plaza in San Antone and Bill Hopper's saloon in Brownsville. Also, he was the loudest and most offensive bully and braggart and badman in Southwest Texas, and he always made good whenever he bragged. And the more noise he made, the more dangerous he was. In the story papers, it is always the quiet, mild-mannered man with light blue eyes and a low voice who turns out to be really dangerous. But in real life and in this story, such is not the case. Give me my choice between assaulting a large, loudmouthed roughhouser and an inoffensive stranger with blue eyes sitting quietly in a corner, and you will see something doing in the corner every time. King James, as I intended to say earlier, was a fierce, 200-pound sunburned, blond man, as pink as an October strawberry, and with 2 horizontal slits under shaggy red eyebrows for eyes. On that day, he wore a flannel shirt that was tan-colored, with the exception of certain large areas which were darkened by transidations due to the summer sun. There seemed to be other clothing and garnishings about him, such as brown duck trousers stuffed into immense boots, and red handkerchiefs and revolvers, and a shotgun laid across his saddle and a leather belt with millions of cartridges shining in it. But your mind skidded off such accessories. What held your gaze was just the 2 little horizontal slits that he used for eyes. This was the man that Old Man Ellison met on the trail, and when you count up in the Baron's favor that he was 65 and weighed 98 pounds and had heard of King James's record and that he, the Baron, had a hankering for the India Simplexa and had no gun with him and wouldn't have used it if he had, you can't censure him if I tell you that the smiles with which the troubadour had filled his wrinkles went out of them and left them plain wrinkles again. But he was not the kind of Baron that flies from danger. He reined in the mile-an-hour pony, no difficult feat, and saluted the formidable monarch. King James expressed himself with royal directness. "You're that old snoozer that's running sheep on this range, ain't you?" said he. "What right have you got to do it? Do you own any land, or lease any?" "I have 2 sections leased from the state," said Old Man Ellison, mildly. "Not by no means you haven't," said King James. "Your lease expired yesterday, and I had a man at the land office on the minute to take it up. You don't control a foot of grass in Texas. You sheep men have got to get. Your time's up. It's a cattle country, and there ain't any room in it for snoozers. This range you've got your sheep on is mine. I'm putting up a wire fence, 40 by 60 miles, and if there's a sheep inside of it when it's done, it'll be a dead one. I'll give you a week to move yours away. If they ain't gone by then, I'll send 6 men over here with Winchesters to make mutton out of the whole lot. And if I find you here at the same time, this is what you'll get." King James patted the breech of his shotgun warningly. Old Man Ellison rode on to the camp of Incarnation. He sighed many times, and the wrinkles in his face grew deeper. Rumors that the old order was about to change had reached him before. The end of free grass was in sight. Other troubles, too, had been accumulating upon his shoulders. His flocks were decreasing instead of growing. The price of wool was declining at every clip. Even Bradshaw, the storekeeper at Frio City, at whose store he bought his ranch supplies, was dunning him for his last 6 months' bill and threatening to cut him off. And so this last greatest calamity, suddenly dealt out to him by the terrible King James, was a crusher. When the old man got back to the ranch at sunset, he found Sam Galloway lying on his cot, propped against a roll of blankets and wool sacks, fingering his guitar. "Hello, Uncle Ben," the troubadour called, cheerfully. "You rolled in early this evening. I've been trying a new twist on the Spanish fandango today. I just about got it. Here's how she goes. Listen." "That's fine, that's mighty fine," said Old Man Ellison, sitting on the kitchen step and rubbing his white, Scotch terrier whiskers. I reckon you've got all the musicians beat east and west, Sam, as far as the roads are cut out. Oh, I don't know, said Sam, reflectively, but I certainly do get there on variations. I guess I can handle anything in 5/4 about as well as any of 'em. But you look kind of faggied out, Uncle Ben. Ain't you feeling right well this evening? Little tired, that's all, Sam. If you ain't played yourself out, let's have that Mexican piece that starts off with, un while, Palomita. It seems that song always kind of soothes and comforts me after I've been riding far or anything bothers me. Why, unfigurement, said Sam. I'll hit her up for you as often as you like. And before I forget about it, Uncle Ben, you want to jerk Bradshaw up about them last hams he sent us. They're just a little bit strong. A man 65 years old, living on a sheep ranch and beset by a complication of disasters, cannot successfully and continuously dissemble. Moreover, a troubadour has eyes quick to see unhappiness in others around him, because it disturbs his own ease. So, on the next day, Sam again questioned the old man about his air of sadness and abstraction. Then old man Ellison told him the story of King James's threats and orders, and that pale melancholy and red ruin appeared to have marked him for their own. The troubadour took the news thoughtfully. He had heard much about King James. On the third day of the 7 days of grace allowed him by the autocrat of the range, old man Ellison drove his buckboard to Frio City to fetch some necessary supplies for the ranch. Bradshaw was hard but not implacable. He divided the old man's order by two and let him have a little more time. One article secured was a new, fine ham for the pleasure of the troubadour. 5 miles out of Frio City on his way home, the old man met King James riding into town. His Majesty could never look anything but fierce and menacing. But today his slits of eyes appeared to be a little wider than they usually were. "Good day," said the king, gruffly. "I've been wanting to see you. I hear it said by a cowman from Sandy yesterday that you was from Jackson County, Mississippi, originally. I want to know if that's a fact." "Born there," said old man Ellison, "and raised there till I was 21. This man says," went on King James, "that he thinks you was related to the Jackson County Reeveses. Was he right?" "Aunt Caroline Reeves," said the old man, "was my half-sister." "She was my aunt," said King James. "I run away from home when I was 16. Now, let's retalk over some things that we discussed a few days ago. They call me a bad man, and they're only half right. There's plenty of room in my pasture for your bunch of sheep and their increase for a long time to come. Aunt Caroline used to cut out sheep in cake dough and bake 'em for me. You keep your sheep where they are and use all the range you want. How's your finances?" The old man related his woes in detail, dignifiedly, with restraint and candor. "She used to smuggle extra grub into my school basket. I'm speaking of Aunt Caroline," said King James. "I'm going over to Frio City today, and I'll ride back by your ranch tomorrow. I'll draw $2,000 out of the bank there and bring it over to you. And I'll tell Bradshaw to let you have everything you want on credit. You are bound to have heard the old saying at home, that the Jackson County Reeveses and Kings would stick closer by each other than chestnut burrs. Well, I'm a king yet whenever I run across a Reeves. So you look out for me along about sundown tomorrow, and don't worry about nothing. Shouldn't wonder if the dry spell don't kill out the young grass." Old man Ellison drove happily ranchward. Once more the smiles filled out his wrinkles. Very suddenly, by the magic of kinship and the good that lies somewhere in all hearts, his troubles had been removed. On reaching the ranch, he found that Sam Galloway was not there. His guitar hung by its buckskin string to a hackberry limb, moaning as the Gulf breeze blew across its masterless strings. The Kiowa endeavored to explain. "Sam, he catch pony," said he, "and say he ride to Frio City. What for no condemn sabe? Say he come back tonight. Maybe so. That all." As the first stars came out, the troubadour rode back to his haven. He pastured his pony and went into the house, his spurs jingling martially. Old man Ellison sat at the kitchen table, having a tin cup of before-supper coffee. He looked contented and pleased. "Hello, Sam," said he. "I'm darn glad to see ye back. I don't know how I managed to get along on this ranch. Anyhow, before you dropped in to cheer things up, I'll bet you've been skylarking around with some of them Frio City gals now, that's kept ye so late. And then old man Ellison took another look at Sam's face and saw that the minstrel had changed the man of action. And while Sam is unbuckling from his waist old man Ellison's six-shooter that the latter had left behind when he drove to town, we may well pause to remark that anywhere and whenever a troubadour lays down the guitar and takes up the sword, trouble is sure to follow. It is not the expert thrust of Athos, nor the cold skill of Aramis, nor the iron wrist of Porthos that we have to fear. It is the Gascon's fury, the wild and unacademic attack of the troubadour, the sword of D'Artagnan. "I done it," said Sam. "I went over to Frio City to do it. I couldn't let him put the ski bunk on you, Uncle Ben. I met him in Summers's saloon. I knowed what to do. I said a few things to him that nobody else heard. He reached for his gun first. Half a dozen fellows saw him do it. But I got mine unlimbered first. 3 doses I gave him, right around the lungs, and a saucer could have covered up all of him. He won't bother you no more." "This is King James you speak of?" asked old man Ellison, while he sipped his coffee. "You bet it was. And they took me before the county judge. And the witnesses what saw him draw his gun first was all there. Well, of course, they put me under $300 bond to appear before the court, but there was 4 or 5 boys on the spot ready to sign the bail. He won't bother you no more, Uncle Ben. You ought to have seen how close them bullet holes was together. I reckon playing a guitar as much as I do must kind of limber a fellow's trigger finger up a little. Don't you think, Uncle Ben?" Then there was a little silence in the castle, except for the spluttering of a venison steak that the Kiowa was cooking. "Sam," said old man Ellison, stroking his white whiskers with a tremulous hand, "would you mind getting the guitar and playing that while Palamita piece once or twice? It always seems to be kind of soothing and comforting when a man's tired and faggied out. There is no more to be said, except that the title of the story is wrong. It should have been called The Last of the Barons. There never will be an end to the troubadours, and now and then it does seem that the jingle of their guitars will drown the sound of the muffled blows of the pickaxes and trip hammers of all the workers in the world." The Last Leaf, by O. Henry. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips called places. These places make strange angles and curves. One street crosses itself a time or two. An artist once discovered a valuable possibility in this street. Suppose a collector with a bill for paints, paper, and canvas should, in traversing this route, suddenly meet himself coming back, without a cent having been paid on account. So, to quaint old Greenwich Village the art people soon came prowling, hunting for north windows and 18th century gables and Dutch attics and low rents. Then they imported some pewter mugs and a chafing dish or two from 6th Avenue, and became a colony. At the top of a squatty, 3-story brick Sue and Johnsy had their studio. Johnsy was familiar for Joanna. One was from Maine, the other from California. They had met at the table d'hd of an 8th Street Delmonico's, and found their tastes in art, chicory salad, and bishop's leaves so congenial that the joint studio resulted. That was in May. In November, a cold, unseen stranger, whom the doctors called pneumonia, stalked about the colony, touching one here and there with his icy fingers. Over on the east side this ravager strode boldly, smiting his victims by scores, but his feet trod slowly through the maze of the narrow and moss-grown places. Mr. Pneumonia was not what you would call a chivalric old gentleman. A mite of a little woman with blood thinned by California zephyrs was hardly fair game for the red-fisted, short-breathed old duffer. But Johnsy he smote, and she lay, scarcely moving, on her painted iron bedstead, looking through the small Dutch window panes at the blank side of the next brick house. One morning the busy doctor invited Sue into the hallway with a shaggy, gray eyebrow. "She has one chance in, let us say, 10, he said, as he shook down the mercury in his clinical thermometer. "And that chance is for her to want to live. This way people have of lining you on the side of the undertaker makes the entire pharmacopoeia look silly. Your little lady has made up her mind that she's not going to get well. Has she anything on her mind?" She wanted to paint the Bay of Naples someday," said Sue. "Paint? Bosh. Has she anything on her mind worth thinking twice? A man, for instance?" "A man," said Sue, with a Jew's harp twang in her voice. Is a man worth, but, no, doctor. There is nothing of the kind. Well, it is the weakness then, said the doctor. I will do all that science, so far as it may filter through my efforts, can accomplish. But whenever my patient begins to count the carriages in her funeral procession, I subtract 50% from the curative power of medicines. If you will get her to ask one question about the new winter styles and cloak sleeves, I will promise you a 1 in 5 chance for her, instead of 1 in 10. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom and cried a Japanese napkin to a pulp. Then she swaggered into Johnsie's room with her drawing board, whistling ragtime. Johnsie lay, scarcely making a ripple under the bedclothes, with her face toward the window. Sue stopped whistling, thinking she was asleep. She arranged her board and began a pen and ink drawing to illustrate a magazine story. Young artists must pave their way to art by drawing pictures for magazine stories that young authors write to pave their way to literature. As Sue was sketching a pair of elegant horse-show riding trousers and a monocle of the figure of the hero, an Idaho cowboy, she heard a low sound, several times repeated. She went quickly to the bedside. Johnsie's eyes were open wide. She was looking out the window and counting backward. 12, she said, and little later 11, and then 10, and 9, and then 8 and 7, almost together. Sue looked solicitously out of the window. What was there to count? There was only a bare, dreary yard to be seen, and the blank side of the brick house 20 feet away. An old ivy vine, gnarled and decayed at the roots, climbed halfway up the brick wall. The cold breath of autumn had stricken its leaves from the vine until its skeleton branches clung, almost bare, to the crumbling bricks. "What is it, dear?" asked Sue. 6, said Johnsie, in almost a whisper. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago there were almost 100. It made my head ache to count them. But now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 left now." "5 what, dear?" "Tell your Sooty." "Leaves. On the ivy vine. When the last one falls I must go, too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you?" "Oh, I never heard of such nonsense," complained Sue, with magnificent scorn. "What have old ivy leaves to do with your getting well? And you used to love that vine so. You naughty girl. Don't be a goosey. Why, the doctor told me this morning that your chances for getting well real soon were. Let's see exactly what he said. He said the chances were 10 to 1. Why, that's almost as good a chance as we have in New York when we ride on the streetcars or walk past a new building. Try to take some broth now, and let Sooty go back to her drawing, so she can sell the editor man with it, and buy port wine for her sick child, and pork chops for her greedy self." "You needn't get any more wine," said Johnsie, keeping her eyes fixed out the window. "There goes another." "No, I don't want any broth. That leaves just 4. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I'll go too." "Johnsie, dear," said Sue, bending over her, "will you promise me to keep your eyes closed and not look out the window until I am done working? I must hand those drawings in by tomorrow. I need the light, or I would draw the shade down." "Couldn't you draw in the other room?" asked Johnsie, coldly. "I'd rather be here by you," said Sue. "Beside, I don't want you to keep looking at those silly ivy leaves." "Tell me as soon as you have finished," said Johnsie, closing her eyes and lying white and still as a fallen statue, "because I want to see the last one fall. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of thinking. I want to turn loose my hold on everything and go sailing down, just like one of those poor, tired leaves." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I must call Behrman up to be my model for the old hermit miner. I'll not be gone a minute. Don't try to move till I come back." Old Behrman was a painter who lived on the ground floor beneath them. He was past 60 and had a Michelangelo's Moses beard curling down from the head of a satyr along with the body of an imp. Behrman was a failure in art. 40 years he had wielded the brush without getting near enough to touch the hem of his mistress's robe. He had been always about to paint a masterpiece, but had never yet begun it. For several years he had painted nothing except now and then a daub in the line of commerce or advertising. He earned a little by serving as a model to those young artists in the colony who could not pay the price of a professional. He drank gin to excess and still talked of his coming masterpiece. For the rest, he was a fierce little old man who scoffed terribly at softness in anyone, and who regarded himself as a special mastiff in waiting to protect the two young artists in the studio above. Sue found Behrman smelling strongly of juniper berries in his dimly lighted den below. In one corner was a blank canvas on an easel that had been waiting there for 25 years to receive the first line of the masterpiece. She told him of Johnsie's fancy and how she feared she would, indeed, light and fragile as a leaf herself, float away when her slight hold upon the world grew weaker. Old Behrman, with his red eyes plainly streaming, shouted his contempt and derision for such idiotic imaginings. "Was," he cried, "is dear people in the world MIT der foolishness to die because leaves day drop off from a confounded vine? I have not heard of such a thing. No, I will not pose as a model for your fool hermit dunderhead. Why do you allow dot silly pusiness to come in der brain of her? ACH, dot poor little Miss Yonzi. She is very ill and weak," said Sue, "and the fever has left her mind morbid and full of strange fancies. Very well, Mr. Behrman. If you do not care to pose for me, you needn't. But I think you are a horrid old flibberty-gibbet." "You are just like a woman," yelled Behrman. "Who said I will not pose? Go on. I come MIT you. For half an hour I have been trying to say I am ready to pose. God, this is not any place in which one so good as Miss Yonzi shall lie sick. Some day I will paint a masterpiece, and VE shall all go away. God, yes." Johnsy was sleeping when they went upstairs. Sue pulled the shade down to the windowsill and motioned Behrman into the other room. In there they peered out the window fearfully at the ivy vine. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A persistent, cold rain was falling, mingled with snow. Behrman, in his old blue shirt, took his seat as the hermit miner on an upturned kettle for a rock. When Sue awoke from an hour's sleep the next morning, she found Johnsy with dull, wide-open eyes staring at the drawn green shade. "Pull it up, I want to see," she ordered in a whisper. Wearily Sue obeyed. But lo, after the beating rain and fierce gusts of wind that had endured through the livelong night, there yet stood out against the brick wall one ivy leaf. It was the last one on the vine, still dark green near its stem, with its serrated edges tinted with the yellow of dissolution and decay. It hung bravely from the branch some 20 feet above the ground. "It is the last one," said Johnsy. "I thought it would surely fall during the night. I heard the wind. It will fall today, and I shall die at the same time." "Dear, dear," said Sue, leaning her worn face down to the pillow. "Think of me. If you won't think of yourself, what would I do?" But Johnsy did not answer. The lonesomest thing in all the world is a soul when it is making ready to go on its mysterious, far journey. The fancies seemed to possess her more strongly as one by one the ties that bound her to friendship and to earth were loosed. The day wore away, and even through the twilight they could see the lone ivy leaf clinging to its stem against the wall. And then, with the coming of the night, the north wind was again loosed, while the rain still beat against the windows and pattered down from the low Dutch eaves. When it was light enough, Johnsy, the merciless, commanded that the shade be raised. The ivy leaf was still there. Johnsy lay for a long time looking at it, and then she called to Sue, who was stirring her chicken broth over the gas stove. "I've been a bad girl, Sudie," said Johnsy. "Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how wicked I was. It is a sin to want to die. You may bring me a little broth now, and some milk with a little port in it, and, no, bring me a hand mirror first, and then pack some pillows about me, and I will sit up and watch you cook." An hour later she said, "Sudie, someday I hope to paint the Bay of Naples." The doctor came in the afternoon, and Sue had an excuse to go into the hallway as he left. "Even chances," said the doctor, taking Sue's thin, shaking hand in his. "With good nursing you'll win. And now I must see another case I have downstairs. Behrman, his name is some kind of an artist, I believe. Pneumonia, too. He is an old, weak man, and the attack is acute. There is no hope for him, but he goes to the hospital today to be made more comfortable." The next day the doctor said to Sue, "She's out of danger. You won. Nutrition and care now, that's all." And that afternoon Sue came to the bed where Johnsy lay, contentedly knitting a very blue and very useless woolen shoulder scarf, and put one arm around her, pillows and all. "I have something to tell you, White Mouse," she said. "Mr. Behrman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. The janitor found him the morning of the first day in his room, downstairs helpless with pain. His shoes and clothing were wet through and icy cold. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. And then they found a lantern, still lighted, and a ladder that had been dragged from its place, and some scattered brushes, and a palette with green and yellow colors mixed on it, and, look out the window, dear, at the last ivy leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never fluttered, or moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell. The Lady Higher Up, by O. Henry. New York City, they said, was deserted, and that accounted, doubtless, for the sounds carrying so far in the tranquil summer air. The breeze was south by southwest. The hour was midnight. The theme was a bit of feminine gossip by wireless mythology. 365 feet above the heated asphalt, the tiptoeing symbolic deity on Manhattan pointed her vacillating arrow straight, for the time, in the direction of her exalted sister on Liberty Island. The lights of the great garden were out. The benches in the square were filled with sleepers and postures so strange that beside them the writhing figures in Door's illustrations of the Inferno would have straightened into Taylor's dummies. The statue of Diana on the tower of the garden, its constancy shown by its weathercock ways, its innocence by the coating of gold that it has acquired, its devotion to style by its single, graceful flying scarf, its candor and artlessness by its habit of ever drawing the long bow, its metropolitanism by its posture of swift flight to catch a Harlem train, remained poised with its arrow pointed across the upper bay. Had that arrow sped truly and horizontally, it would have passed 50 feet above the head of the heroic matron, whose duty it is to offer a cast ironical welcome to the oppressed of other lands. Seaward this lady gazed, and the furrows between steamship lines began to cut steerage rates. The translators, too, have put an extra burden upon her. Liberty lighting the world, as her creator christened her, would have had a no more responsible duty, except for the size of it, than that of an electrician or a Standard Oil magnate. But to enlighten the world, as our learned civic guardians Englished it, requires abler qualities. And so poor Liberty, instead of having a sinecure as a mere illuminator, must be converted into a Chautauqua schoolma'am, with the oceans for her field instead of the placid, classic lake. With a fireless torch and an empty head must she dispel the shadows of the world and teach it its A, B, C's. "Ah, there, Mrs. Liberty," called a clear, rollicking soprano voice through the still, midnight air. "Is that you, Miss Diana? Excuse my not turning my head. I'm not as flighty and whirly-whirly as some, and 'tis so hoarse I am I can hardly talk on account of the peanut hulls left on the stairs in me throat by that last boatload of tourists from Marietta, Ohio. 'Tis after being a fine evening, miss. If you don't mind my asking," came the bell-like tones of the golden statue, "I'd like to know where you got that City Hall brogue. I didn't know that Liberty was necessarily Irish." "If ye'd studied the history of art in its foreign complications, ye'd not need to ask," replied the offshore statue. "If ye wasn't so light-headed and giddy, ye'd know that I was made by a Dago and presented to the American people on behalf of the French government for the purpose of welcoming Irish immigrants into the Dutch city of New York. 'Tis that I've been doing night and day since I was erected. Ye must know, Miss Diana, that 'tis with statues the same as with people. 'Tis not their makers nor the purposes for which they were created that influence the operations of their tongues at all. It's the associations with which they become associated, I'm telling ye." "You're dead right," agreed Diana. "I notice it on myself. If any of the old guys from Olympus were to come along and hand me any hot air in the ancient Greek, I couldn't tell it from a conversation between a Coney Island car conductor and a 5-cent fare." "I'm right glad ye made up your mind to be sociable, Miss Diana," said Mrs. Liberty. "'Tis a lonesome life I have down here. Is there anything doing up in the city, Miss Diana, dear?" "Oh, la la la. No," said Diana. "Notice that la la la, Aunt Liberty? Got that from Paris by night on the roof garden under me. You'll hear that la 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 at the Café Macan now, along with Garsong. The bohemian crowd there have become tired of Garsong since O'Rafferty, the head waiter, punched 3 of them for calling him it. Oh no. The town's strictly on the bum these nights. Everybody's away. Saw a downtown merchant on a roof garden this evening with his stenographer. Show was so dull he went asleep. A waiter biting on a dime tipped to see if it was good half woke him up. He looks around and sees his little pothook's perpetrator. Says he, will you take a letter, Miss de St. Montmorency? Sure, in a minute, says she, if you'll make it an X. That was the best thing happened on the roof. So you see how dull it is. La la la. 'Tis fine ye have it up there in society, Miss Diana. Ye have the cat show and the horse show and the military tournaments where the privates look grand as generals and the generals try to look grand as floorwalkers. And ye have the sportsman's show, where the girl that measures 36'19", 45 cooks breakfast food in a birch bark wigwam on the banks of the Grand Canal of Venice, conducted by one of the Vanderbilts, Bernard McFadden, and the Reverends Dowie and Duss. And ye have the French ball, where the original Cohens and the Robert Emmett Sangerbun Society danced the Highland fling one with another. And ye have the Grand Orion Ball, which is the most beautiful pageant in the world, where the French students vie with the Tyrolean warblers in doing the cakewalk. Ye have the best job for a statue in the whole town, Miss Diana. 'Tis weary work, sighed the island statue, disseminatin' the science of liberty in New York Bay. Sometimes when I take a peep down at Ellis Island and see the gang of immigrants I'm supposed to light up, 'tis tempted I am to blow out the gas and let the coroner write out their naturalization papers. Say, it's a shame, ain't it, to give you the worst end of it? Came the sympathetic antiphony of the steeplechase goddess. It must be awfully lonesome down there with so much water around you. I don't see how you ever keep your hair in curl. And that Mother Hubbard you were wearing went out 10 years ago. I think those sculptor guys ought to be held for damages for putting iron or marble clothes on a lady. That's where Mr. St. Gaudens was wise. I'm always a little ahead of the styles, but they're coming my way pretty fast. Excuse my back a moment. I caught a puff of wind from the north. Shouldn't wonder if things had loosened up in Esopus. There, now. It's in the west. I should think that gold plank would have calmed the air out in that direction. What were you saying, Mrs. Liberty? A fine chat I've had with ye, Miss Diana, ma'am, but I see one of them European steamers a-sailin' up the Narrows, and I must be attendin' to me duties. 'Tis me job to extend aloft the torch of liberty to welcome all them that survive the kicks that the steerage stewards give 'em while landin'. Sure, 'tis a great country ye can come to for $8.50, and the doctor waitin' to send ye back home free if he sees your eyes red from cryin' for it. The golden statue veered in the changing breeze, menacing many points on the horizon with its aureate arrow. So long, Aunt Liberty, sweetly called Diana of the tower. Some night, when the wind's right, I'll call you up again. But, say, you haven't got such a fierce kick coming about your job. I've kept a pretty good watch on the island of Manhattan since I've been up here. That's a pretty sick-looking bunch of liberty chasers they dump down at your end of it. But they don't all stay that way. Every little while up here I see guys signing checks and voting the right ticket and encouraging the arts and taking a bath every morning that was shoved ashore by a dock laborer born in the United States who never earned over $40 a month. Don't run down your job, Aunt Liberty. You're all right, all right.